Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. We might kick off if you don't mind. So, welcome. My name is James Ronkin from Armidale Regional Council. I'd just like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we're meeting upon this evening and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Could also ask you just to check your mobile phones and maybe set them to silent, please, if you don't mind. And I'd also take this opportunity to acknowledge Councillor Peter Bailey, who is with us tonight, and also my councillor colleagues, Scott McDonald, Kelly Stidworthy, Mark Byrne, Ben Smith, we've got Steve Baker up the back, Brad Munns, Renata Davis, Rob, whose surname I forget, Guinness, is it? Rob, okay, just Rob, and Melissa. So welcome, and of course Owen on the keyboards. Thank you for coming along to the presentation this afternoon to hear about Council's draft operational plan for 21-22. As you're aware, we've currently got this document on public exhibition, and that public exhibition will be completed on the 24th of June. It's not been an easy task to pull together the operational plan and budget for this financial year. Planning for this plan started at the end of 2020 and has been ongoing since. We've had 5 sessions that we've run with councillors over this period through April and into early May, and councillors had to make some really difficult decisions around what could be afforded and therefore included in the draft operational plan for this financial year. While the council is no longer under an administration, it remains under a performance improvement order issued by the New South Wales Minister for Local Government. The performance improvement order requires council to achieve an improved financial position from previous years and to continue to improve on this as we move forward. And trying to do that's proved to be incredibly difficult this year. For a range of reasons, and a lot of that's due to some of the constraints on the levels of funding that are available, the negative impacts on revenue that have occurred, and the continual increasing costs that fall outside council's control. However, what we have been able to manage to do is table a budget that meets the requirements of the performance improvement order and is really a baseline, if you like, that we can build on for future years. The draft operational plan and budget for 21-22 was unanimously adopted by the council at a meeting held on the 26th of May 2021 and therefore reflects their position. In short, I'd say that while the current position of council, both financially and from a governance perspective, is dire, it is salvageable. From a budget perspective, this is the first step in setting a responsible and sustainable budget that meets the requirements of the Local Government Act and seeks to lay a foundation from which we can build. Late last year, council consulted the community on a special rate variation. This was necessary as the temporary special rate variation was expiring on the 30th of June this year, and council would have had its revenue reduced by approximately $1.5 million per year if the SRV had not been replaced. Council has been successful in securing the replacement of the SRV on a maintained services basis. What this means is that service levels will remain at around the same level as they have in past years for the short term. We're not proposing to increase or improve services under this budget. We have to continue to deliver services within the current funding envelope that we have, and this is going to get tougher in future years. As council, we've got significant challenges ahead of us. We have a large infrastructure base to maintain and a relatively low revenue base. Our forecasts show that we're not investing enough money into infrastructure maintenance and assets such as our roads, footpaths and buildings, and these will deteriorate as a result. In future years, we will need to make some tough decisions on how to address this. And just a quick housekeeping, madam, I'm going to throw over to Kelly shortly to do the presentation. We'll leave questions and answers until the end if you're happy with that. And we've got a roving mic that we'll send around, so we'll just ask you to speak into that. So again, the people that are listening via the webcast can hear your question and hear the answer. So without any further ado, I'll throw over to Kelly.
Thanks, James, and welcome everyone. My name's Kelly Stidworthy. I'm the Manager of Financial Services at Armidale Regional Council. So we have a presentation for you tonight. I will warn you, it will take the better part of an hour to work through. And then we've got about half an hour at the end for questions and answers or comments. So that is, at that time, the floor will be open to you guys to bring up what you would like to. And we are hoping to finish this meeting by about 7 o'clock this evening. So just a bit of background on Armidale Regional Council. The council was formed in 2016 along with a number of newly merged councils in New South Wales following an IPART review that found nearly 2/3 of New South Wales councils were not fit for the future. The population of the region is around 30,000 people. The land area is about 8,630 square kilometres. So the size of this region is larger than many countries in the world. And we have a population density in this region of about 3.4 persons per square kilometre. In terms of ratepayers, there's around 13,000 ratepayers. A major challenge for regional councils is population density. So there's not as many people to spread the cost of services around as there are in city areas. And if you compare urban and regional areas, it's like comparing apples and oranges. So you need to take a broader look at all the things that councils are expected to do and the services that they provide. And I'll give you an example. So this council has an extensive unsealed road network of 1,078 kilometres, and we run 4 grading crews year round at a cost of about $3,300 per crew per day. And if you compare that type of service to a city council, they wouldn't even own a grader. In 21-22, we're budgeting for 296 full-time equivalent staff members, and that's the same number of FTEs that the combined councils reported at merger. This slide provides a snapshot of the key services that the council is responsible for. So apart from a large base of infrastructure to maintain, there are many services that council runs that require staff and other resources. Most of the services that we supply are required under legislation, and some of them generate revenue. However, it's impossible to run all of these services at full cost recovery. An example for you would be swimming pools. We're not able to charge user charges and fees to recover the full cost of running swimming pools because that would make them very expensive and then therefore only available to a very small section of the population, namely the people who could afford the fees. So the majority of our services fall into the category of public goods, including the roads, bridges, footpaths, public parks and libraries. Public goods are available to everyone, and that means that you can't exclude anybody from using them. In order to cover the cost of providing public goods to the community, we have to raise rates, and therefore rates are a tax, they're not a fee for service. Another area that we're responsible for is the management of infrastructure. Our infrastructure currently is valued at close to or just over $1 billion. And that's the estimated gross replacement cost just of infrastructure. In addition to that, we manage a broad range of other assets, including land, and that adds about another $128 million to that total. Infrastructure assets have long useful lives, and they only exist to provide services to the community. The majority of the assets that council manages can't be sold to generate funding, as they're used to provide services or they're public goods. Assets deteriorate over time, so if you take the example of a road, vehicles drive over them every day, they're impacted by weather, they require grading and pothole patching to maintain them in a satisfactory condition, and we would refer that to as maintenance. Every so often though, you need to gravel resheet or you need to reseal the road because maintenance can only really do so much, and we would refer to that as renewing the road. And eventually you may have to do something entirely different. You might need to make a 1-lane road a two-lane road because if you have an increased volume of traffic. And we would refer to that as an upgrade. An infrastructure backlog occurs when the level of maintenance or renewal is not possible to keep existing assets in a satisfactory condition. The backlog is the amount of money that's required to be spent to bring council's assets up to a satisfactory standard. And if the backlog increases, it will cost more in the long run to do that. Council doesn't currently generate sufficient levels of funding to maintain and renew all the assets under its control to a satisfactory condition. The inability to source appropriate levels of funding for effective infrastructure renewal and replacement is the most critical issue facing local government across Australia. Rates represent about 3.6% of all government taxes, but local government is responsible for around 25% of all non-financial assets held by all spheres of government. With infrastructure assets being such long-lived assets, up to 100 years, this issue is not a short-term issue that we can quickly address. It requires a long-term strategy to manage the assets appropriately. Some further background is in relation to Council's key responsibilities under the Local Government Act. So some of those are listed on the slide. So I guess first and foremost, Council's required to facilitate its role as required under the Act. The primary responsibility, therefore, is to facilitate the collection, management and spending of public funding on community services. And the Act requires us to carry out functions in a way that facilitates a local community that is strong, healthy and prosperous. To achieve this, the Council must, as is shown on this slide there, apply the principles of sound financial management. We need to prepare forward plans, advocate on behalf of the community, act as a planning and regulatory authority, act as a water supply authority, act as a roads authority, manage public land and provide waste services. It's a fairly vast range of legislative responsibilities, but it doesn't actually cover everything that councils are required to do. In some areas, councils don't manage water, sewerage or waste, but in regional areas, generally speaking, councils are required to do all of these things. It's fair to say that local government's responsibilities are constantly expanding without increased funding, and there's a continuous shift from state government to local government. An example is Crown land, where councils now have full responsibility to maintain Crown reserves and are expected to subsidise shortfalls in maintenance costs from general revenue. A new raft of legislation was recently put through that increases the administration of Crown land reserves onto councils, and it requires us to have specialised staff available to manage those assets. But there's no additional revenue passed on to do this, so it just has to be absorbed, and it will come at the cost of council doing something else. Just a bit of background on the planning process. That's a requirement under the Local Government Act, and all New South Wales councils will follow this process. And that ensures that there is a consistent framework in place against which councils can be benchmarked. So we do have to maintain a 10-year community strategic plan. Under that plan, we have to then have a 4-year delivery program and a resourcing strategy. Those documents cover 4 years to align with the council election cycle, and they're designed to be more specific than the strategic plan and set out the actions and resources needed to achieve the goals in the strategic plan. Every year, a 1-year operational plan and budget is prepared, and the format of this plan is aligned to the activities that are in the delivery program. So the idea of that process is that the goals set in the strategic plan flow through to the delivery program and then flow through to the operational plan and budget. The delivery program for the next 4 years will be developed when the new council is elected later this year, and a point in relation to this process would be that asset management and financial strategy should be the key drivers of the planning process. So General Manager has mentioned on the performance improvement order, so just a bit of background on this. As you're aware, Council has faced some significant challenges since merger. This year has been no different. And we've experienced some significant change during 2020. So that we had suspension of councillors by the Minister for Local Government in June. We were then placed under administration until December. And we currently have 7 of our councillors returned, and we remain operating under a performance improvement order until the election. The PIO is a public document. It's available on the website. It contains a number of specific actions required to improve council, including its financial performance. How we are progressing under the performance improvement order is monitored by a financial controller who reports directly to the Minister for Local Government. The financial controller is an advisory role, but they do have broad powers under the Local Government Act. However, we still operate as a council the same way we always have. The council still receives reports and makes decisions as per normal, and the General Manager is responsible for running council operations. The Financial Controller reviews and provides advice on key decisions that may have financial impacts, and he's therefore been involved in the process for the development of the draft operational plan and budget for 21-22. It's important to recognise that both the Performance Improvement Order and the Financial Controller are in place to ensure Council complies with the Local Government Act and makes sustainable decisions in the best interest of the organisation. And as long as we do this, there is no intervention from the Financial Controller. As such, the Council fully supports the PIO and the associated actions, and it is viewed as a mechanism to help Council get back on track, back to core services and values. The PIO covers a few key areas that need improvement. They are governance practices, property management and Council finances. A requirement is also that Council has to ensure that resources are provided in order to do those improvements. The organisation is about 6 months into the implementation of the actions from the PIO, and we've been making good progress on implementation of those recommendations. So you're more than likely aware that Council conducted a special rate variation process during 2021, and the reason we went through that process was because the Council had a temporary SRV that was expiring. One of the options proposed was a higher SRV amount that would have provided additional asset renewal funding, but that option was not supported by the majority of the community, and Council therefore voted to apply for an SRV that maintained funding from rate revenue at existing levels. We called this the maintained services scenario. So the maintained services scenario will result in current levels of service maintained in the short term. We'll see the asset renewal backlog increase, and it provides limited options to fund new assets as the region grows. Council was successful in obtaining approval from IPART to continue with the temporary SRV on a permanent basis, and it will be included in the rate base moving forward. The SRV will provide $1.5 million in funding annually for asset renewals, including roads, footpaths, curb and gutter, community facilities and buildings. And how we intend to allocate the SRV to these programs in 21-22 is shown on the slide. And I'll just note that the amounts that we show are the SRV amount only. The total expenditure allocated to those programs is higher than this. We are required to report back against the SRV each year in the annual report, and one of the requirements of the SRV is that Council improves its financial sustainability and manages the asset backlog in accordance with what we submitted to IPART. And we've therefore set the 21-22 budget to be in line with the SRV application to IPART, particularly in relation to the level of funding allocated towards asset renewal. So just a little bit of background on some of the challenges that we faced in relation to the budget, not just for 21-22, these have been ongoing. So in relation to COVID-19, it's negatively impacted Council's revenues, and it is difficult to predict how long this will go on for. We do expect it to continue on beyond 21-22. The estimated revenue loss from the impacts of COVID for the 21-22 budget is about $1.2 million, mainly related to airport revenues. And the total cumulative impacts from COVID-19 against previous budgeted levels is $3.6 million from reduced revenue from the airport, property leases and parking fine income. Clearly we can't carry that loss of income without offsetting that, so we've had to reduce expenditure across the business to ensure that we can continue to manage those impacts. Flooding and storm damage. So extreme bushfire and then subsequent flooding severely impacted Kempsey Road and has caused that road to deteriorate in condition quite dramatically. And as a result, there have been significant natural disaster claims lodged with state government. In 21-22, we're forecasting to spend $15 million on natural disaster restoration works, along with $6.9 million on associated grant-funded works on Kempsey Road. It'll be one of the biggest capital programs that we have undertaken. The size and complexity of the works program on this road alone has required Council to dedicate specialised staff and other resources to solely support that program, and it directs effort away from other areas. Flooding events have also impacted roads and bridges in other areas of the region, and we're working through natural disaster claims for those impacts as well. In terms of drought impact, the 21-22 budget continues to be impacted by drought in the form of reduced water consumption, and there are some remaining costs in relation to groundwater infrastructure. Ongoing severe drought conditions have negatively impacted Council's water fund by an estimated $6.9 million. And the drought impacts have necessitated Council to increase water consumption charges in 2021 due to a combined impact of reduced water revenue and higher costs. That was deemed necessary to generate sufficient revenue to operate water services and to provide funding for water infrastructure. We are projecting that we will need to spend at least $84 million over the next 10 years on water infrastructure alone, but this amount will be higher if we have to undertake additional projects such as the dam wall raising. In terms of the asset renewal challenges, $157 million of Council's assets are in satisfactory, poor and very poor condition. The main asset classes in these categories are buildings, other structures and roads. Ongoing investment in asset renewal helps to prevent the deterioration of asset condition and avoids the need to spend significantly more in the future. We have funded asset renewal in the budget to the level determined in Council's SRV application, but we've also identified through the budget process that we require an additional $6.2 million per year in funding to meet road service levels. We also require an additional $400,000 a year to meet building renewal requirements. The funding levels for asset renewals that are set in the budget are at what the community can afford, not the level of funding that's required to keep assets at a satisfactory condition over the long term. In relation to the last point on the slide, fixed revenue and cost increases, Council's predominantly reliant on rates and charges revenue for funding, and it presents challenges in balancing the ability for ratepayers to absorb increases against the need for funding to maintain service levels. Generally speaking, all costs that Council incurs increase each year by at least CPI. As you would experience at home, there's some costs that increase beyond this. I'll give you an example. Our insurance costs are expected to increase by 32% in 21-22. It's about a $500,000 increase. And we're also expecting the electricity cost to increase by around 10%. Just to give you some context in relation to those increases, the increase in rates from the rate peg is only expected to increase revenue by about $500,000. So an issue across the board with local government is that the increase in revenue from rates is not able to keep up with rising costs, and we are limited in what charges can be levied. So many of the fees and charges raised by local government, such as in planning and development, are fixed by state government. We don't have control over the level of those charges. It has not all been doom and gloom, so there's been a fair bit of good stuff that's been happening as well. We did start the 2021 year projecting a $2.3 million operating deficit, and at our Q3 budget review we improved this to a $2.6 million operating surplus. It's a fairly significant turnaround in 12 months, and a key reason for this improvement partly is grants, but it's also because the organisation has been putting a lot of effort into identifying savings and managing budgets. We have deleted and deferred a number of projects from the budget, and we've sourced grant funding where we can to undertake activities rather than funding them from rates or other revenues. We've taken the approach that expenditure outside of core service delivery can only be undertaken where it's necessary or critical. Our cash position has also improved as a result. Unrestricted cash is forecast to increase from a starting position of about $3.1 million to $3.4 million. Unrestricted cash is important as it is Council's only buffer for unexpected events. Under the Performance Improvement Order, it is recommended that Council maintains an unrestricted cash level of $4 to $5 million. And we are currently under this, but we're keeping this the focus of our budget review processes. We don't have the financial capacity to fix everything in 1 year, but we have established foundation in relation to this budget to do this over a number of years. So just a bit of background on the draft operational plan and budget for 21-22. We've worked together with councillors and staff to produce the draft operational plan and budget. It's our plan for 21-22, and it contains what we plan to fund and what we intend to deliver. Within the plan, you'll see that there are estimated costs for each project and program, and there's detailed budget information on Council's operations and capital works. It also includes an updated long-term financial plan covering 10 years. We don't intend to fund additional projects or services in 21-22 that are not in this plan. And while variations to our program could occur where we're advised of new grants, for example, we will be prioritising delivery of the actions already in this plan over anything new. Development of the draft operational plan and budget began at the end of 2020, and it's been ongoing since then. We've held 5 budget workshops with councillors over this period, and the council has made some difficult decisions about what can be afforded and therefore included in the draft operational plan and budget. As part of a back to basics approach, we've removed almost $14 million in projects and service level funding that was requested. It doesn't result in any reduction to core services in 21-22. We also had to ensure that the Performance Improvement Order and the associated actions from that are resourced. And we've had to ensure that what we presented to IPART as part of the SRV application is reflected in the budget. It's required strong discipline to ensure that there's no increase in service levels proposed and our financial reserves are at least preserved and that funding is prioritised towards asset renewal. The 21-22 budget position that we've reached is balanced and ensures that we can actually afford the service levels proposed in that plan. It's a very lean budget, however, it allows for nothing extra. So there's no money available for anything other than what has been proposed in the plan. It will be important for this to be recognised by the community now and into the future, as Council will have to continue this path and be run prudently with a back to core services approach from here, mainly because there simply won't be the money to do anything else. So the Council is required by the Local Government Act to account for and show budgets separately for the Water Fund, Sewer Fund and the General Fund. General Fund is essentially everything else. And we also report a consolidated result. The assets and liabilities for each of the three funds are required to be accounted for separately, and in particular, we can only use cash reserves pertaining to each fund to support that fund's activities. All three funds are critical and support underlying essential services. The General Fund is the most difficult to resource, mainly because it contains everything the Council does apart from water and sewerage. We have to track the performance of each fund separately and we have to look at the ratios for each fund separately. The reason for that is because we can't use money from water and sewerage other than for water and sewerage. And each fund supports a distinct and separate base of assets. So as you would be aware, Council's operational plan and budget has been developed during a period of difficult circumstances. So a focus has been placed on rebuilding the organisation and getting back to basics. The key assumptions that will support the 21-22 budget include that the rate peg will be 2%, rate peg set by IPART. We will include revenues as per forecasts. In most areas, we have increased the value of fees and charges and the associated revenues. There are ongoing negative impacts from COVID-19 and natural disasters that have been incorporated. Full-time equivalent staff budgeted for remain as per the numbers at merger. And we've included asset renewal funding as part of the SRV scenario to maintain services. We do need to achieve an operating surplus in all three funds, and we do need to, at a minimum, preserve the General Fund unrestricted cash position. A key focus of the 21-22 budget has been on achieving the key performance indicator results that support financially sustainable outcomes as far as possible. This was in line with the community feedback from the SRV consultation process, where the majority view was for Council to continue to deliver existing services within current funding levels. This also means not increasing service levels. It's only going to be possible with tight financial controls in place and prioritising decision making to ensure positive financial outcomes are achieved for Council at all times. The 21-22 budget includes a consolidated operating surplus of $1 million with an operating surplus projected for each fund. An operating surplus indicates that Council can cover its operational costs, including depreciation expense. This is important because depreciation is an important indicator of how much funding is required for asset renewal. If an operating surplus is generated, Council would have money to help pay down debt, fund new capital expenditure, for example upgrades to assets, and also transfer money to cash reserves. These are all important areas for councils. If Council runs an operating deficit, it will not be able to do this and it will not be able to fully fund asset renewal. So our total recurrent revenue for the Council is budgeted at $78 million for 21-22. You can see from the graph that the largest source of revenue is from rates and annual charges at 47%. Annual charges are levied for water, sewer, waste and drainage. The next biggest source of revenue is from user charges and fees at 32%. And this category contains water user charges, revenue generated from state government roadworks and waste fees. Operating grants and contributions contribute 16% and include financial assistance grants, road grants, and there's a number of other grants in that category. Other revenues contribute 4% and include revenue from fines and leases plus a range of other revenues. Interest income contributes 1%. This has dropped substantially due to the economic impacts of COVID-19. Recurrent expenditure is estimated to be $77 million in 21-22. The largest source of expenditure is employee costs at 33%, and this is consistent with comparable councils. The next biggest source of expenditure is materials and contracts at 26%. This is a fairly broad category. It includes a wide range of expenditure that we need to maintain assets and operate services. Other expenses is at 15%. In this category of costs like insurance, donations and contributions, and software licence fees. Borrowing costs, and this is only the interest on loans, not the principal, is 2%. And last but not least is depreciation. This is estimated to be $18.5 million in 21-22. Depreciation is the estimate of the decline in value associated with assets, and it's an indication of the amount of money that should be invested in renewing assets on an annual basis. This slide shows all of Council's funding sources, both from recurrent revenues, so operational revenues, and other sources. It explains where all of Council's cash will come from in 21-22. We expect to receive a total of $127 million through various sources. Recurrent revenue will contribute about 62%. We also expect to receive 28% from capital grants, 8% will come from new borrowings proposed in the Water Fund, and 1% will come from the sale of assets, which is the estimated value of vehicle and plant disposals. 1% will come from cash reserves. This slide is the opposite of the previous one. It shows where Council's planning to spend the cash that I've just outlined in 21-22. So recurrent expenditure will require 46%, capital expenditure will require 52%, and repayment of borrowings, which is the principal amount, will require 2%. The 21-22 capital budget includes $65 million worth of projects, and out of this around $30 million relates to asset renewal, including water and sewerage. You'll recall on the previous slide that depreciation is estimated at $18.5 million. So we are well short on the funding. We're well short on funding asset renewal to the required level. The rest of the proposed capital expenditure mainly relates to new projects. And out of this program, $40 million is grant funded. We are experiencing an unusually high level of grants, and most of the grants we receive are for the construction of new assets. While this is good in that it will help Council improve community assets and there will be community benefits that flow, it also increases our depreciation expense, and we have to ensure that that's funded. We've got some detail on some of the individual projects that are going to be undertaken, so I'd just like to invite Mark Byrne, our Utilities Manager, to come up and describe some of those.
Good evening, everyone. So, as you can see on the slide, we've got the Puddlelock water main upgrade. So, Puddlelock Dam's our backup supply for Armidale. It was built back in 1928. It's been identified that the pipeline's too small to deliver the quantity of water needed to supply town by itself. So we secured 50% funding last year to replace the pipeline from the dam through to the water treatment plant with a new pump station. And like I said, that's 50% funded through New South Wales Government. The other project is the Guyra Dam wall upgrade. The Guyra Dam was built in 1896. It was recognised as a high-risk dam of breaking and flooding Armidale by Dam Safety New South Wales. So Council went to the community asking for their opinion on three options. The three options were to remove the wall completely, reduce the height of the wall to make it safer, or to maintain the wall height and keep the dam. The community decided on the third option, to maintain the dam at the current height. So with that, we engaged contractors who have started. As you can see, there's a road built at the bottom of the dam for them to access. So the work involves drilling 60 holes down through the dam wall vertically and into the base of the dam or the toe of the dam to stabilise that dam and hold it in place. That work also is 50% funded from Infrastructure New South Wales. That's a $8.1 million project. And then the third project there is we're looking at a baler and weighbridge install at our Longswap Road facility. The baler will go into what's called a dirty MRF, which basically takes all the waste and it's put on a sorting slab, and it's all the recyclable materials from construction material will be taken out and recycled, and the minimal inert material will be baled, pressed into bales, and then transported to regional to be put into landfill. This reduces greatly the amount of waste going into that landfill, which could extend the life of the landfill possibly out for another 10 years. It's estimated a 50-year lifespan now. We might get another 10 out of it by baling this and reducing the impact on that landfill. And in that project as well, there's a second weighbridge to go in at the Longswap Road facility. That'll increase tracking waste and charging more specifically for what's coming in and going out, which will also help operations. And it's also a safety issue with vehicles having to come back the wrong way on the current weighbridge at the moment. There's traffic issues and all that. So that's the Longswap Road project as well. So.
Thanks, Mark. Just for your awareness, Mark does run our utilities area, so water, sewage and waste, so a few responsibilities there. Next up, I'd just like to invite Ben Smith, our Manager of Road and Parks, up here to give you a bit of an overview on some of their bridge replacement program and also our proposed roads expenditure.
Thanks for that, Kelly. Yeah, I'll just run over a few of the projects to do with the bridge replacement program for 21-22. So council currently has 18 timber bridges left in the LGA which have reached their useful life and require replacement. Of those 18, 5 are going to be replaced in the next financial year, with one recently completed and open to traffic being the Cooks Road Bridge over Jemerick Creek. The bridges to be replaced include Martin's Gully on Shambrook Ave. That one's 750 grand. That's going to be funded out of the Bridge Renewal Program, half and half, and R2R. But that's Roads to Recovery, rather. The scope there is to replace the existing bridge with a new 2-lane concrete structure with a minimum 44-tonne load capacity. The need for that project is it's required to restore and maintain the 44-tonne load capacity because the bridge is starting to deteriorate, and to meet current and future traffic volumes. The status of that one, Tobco has been engaged as the design and construct contractor in May, and the design phase is currently underway. The design is going to be completed early in the new financial year, with construction anticipated to be complete in December of this year. The next one is the Boorlong Creek Bridge on Boorlong Road. That one's worth $1.204 million to be funded from the Fixing Country Bridges program. The scope there is to replace the existing timber bridge with a new concrete structure. The concept, design and estimations will be done for both a single lane and a dual lane bridge, with the final decision to be based on the estimates and availability of the funding. The current status of that one is to go with, we're looking at going into an MOU with Glen Innes and Inverell councils, so we're working on that at the moment. So the design is going to be completed in April of 2022, and construction's to be commenced shortly after that. The next one will be the Laura Creek Bridge. That one's going to be worth $638,000. It's to be fully funded from the Fixing Country Bridges program. The scope there is to improve the existing timber bridge and causeway to minimise flooding impacts. The current status with that is the design phase is currently underway. The timeline on that bridge will be, design will be completed early in 2022, with construction anticipated to be completed shortly after that. The next one is the Lambs Valley Bridge. That one's worth $440,000. It's to be fully funded out of the Fixing Country Bridges program. So we're just going to be replacing the existing timber structure with a 2-lane culvert. That one there is going to be delivered by, well, at this stage, it's going to be delivered by our internal roads team, because it's a fairly straightforward and low risk type project. The next one's going to be the Bakers Creek Bridge on Old Hillgrove Road. That one's worth $1.32 million. It's to be funded under the Fixing Country Bridges program again. The scope there is to replace the existing timber bridge with a concrete bridge. The concept design and estimates will be done much like one of the other bridges for single and two-lane bridges, with the final decision to be dependent on the estimates and availability of funding. The current status, we're working with Glen Innes and Inverell in an MOU. Timeline, designs to be completed in April 2022, with construction anticipated to be completed the following year. Given the sheer volume of stimulus work around the state, we're experiencing real difficulty in securing suitably pre-qualified bridge construction contractors, hence the reason why we've had to enter into this MOU to try and get better bargaining power across the state. It's a real problem. So, just move on to some of the other asset classes that we look after. So you can see there, we've got the maintenance figure and the renewal figure. So with curb and guttering, the projects to be completed in the upcoming financial year have been selected from the Capital 10-year Forward Works program, and I'm happy to field any questions on that after this session. Some of the projects currently being considered for inclusion in that program include Bradley Lane stormwater and curb and gutter rectification, and some other projects in Markham Street and Taylor Street, O'Connor Road and Armidale. But there's, as Kelly has mentioned, there's an enormous backlog of issues, so we need to be very mindful of that. The same can be said for the footpaths. We've had a really difficult previous year, but this year we've got a pretty decent budget to work on chewing down on that backlog, that infrastructure backlog. We'll move on to some of the stuff about unsealed roads. So with the maintenance grading and stormwater drainage on the unsealed network, we've had really poor conditions over the last 2 years, combined with very restricted budgets. The level of service delivered in these areas has been less than desirable. But this financial year and in this budget, the outlook is much brighter, with a focus on improving drainage to better protect our unsealed road network. Our roads team's developed a draft program of works for our maintenance grading across the LGA, and that's going to be placed on the website for everyone to have a look at and to place comment on. So it's going to be a very busy year for our gravel resheeting across the LGA. So we've got roads including Chandler Road, Donald Road, among others, and with recent announcement of grant funding under the Local Roads and Community Infrastructure Grant, we'll be ensuring that the roads with the greatest need are prioritised first. I think that's it. Thanks.
Thanks, Ben. Ben's a relatively new recruit to council, so comes with a lot of experience, and we were fortunate to grab him in that process. Just in relation to some of the draft key performance ratios for 21-22, this table shows how we are projected to track on these key financial ratios at a consolidated level. So the operating performance ratio is particularly important for the reasons I have described. In 21-22, we're budgeting for this to be 1.3%. This is over the benchmark of greater than 0%, and it represents a positive trend, as council hasn't always budgeted for an operating surplus. It has previously forecast operating deficits, though not always for every fund. The own source revenue ratio is below the benchmark of greater than 60%, and this is due to grants being unusually high. We don't expect this trend to continue beyond 21-22, and we expect that this will return to be being above the benchmark again in future. The building and infrastructure renewal ratio is forecast to improve at 83% in 21-22. It's showing improvement, but it is supposed to be at 100% or greater. And this indicates we're not directing enough funding to asset renewal because it uses depreciation as the comparative. The infrastructure backlog ratio is currently estimated at 2%, which is in line with the benchmark of less than 2%, but it's forecasting a downward trend, so this ratio is projected to increase above the benchmark. The asset maintenance ratio is the estimate of how much council should be spending on the maintenance of assets to keep them at satisfactory condition. Council estimates it's currently spending about 89% of what's actually required. The debt service cover ratio indicates the level of cash available to service loan repayments. The benchmark is greater than 2 times and council is above this. However, the decisions to borrow need to take into account what borrowings are proposed for and the other demands on cash. The reason for this is while the borrowings may provide a cash injection in year 1, you then need to meet the repayments and you need to have the available cash every year in order to be able to do that. The unrestricted current ratio measures how many months council can continue paying for its immediate expenses without additional cash inflow. This excludes cash that's restricted, such as in water and sewerage, and council is currently below the benchmark of 1.5 times because we have low unrestricted cash. So just a little bit more information on the building and infrastructure renewals ratio. Apart from the operating surplus ratio, it's probably the key one to focus on. And so while some of the financial ratios are showing improvement, this is coming at the cost of key infrastructure ratios because council does not have a sufficient level of funding to deliver the required levels of service, both from an asset maintenance and renewal perspective. In adopting the draft 21-22 budget, a total of $1.2 million in funding requested to meet required maintenance service levels in roads and parks was left out of the budget because we don't have the money to fund this. To meet renewal and rehabilitation service levels in council's road strategy would require an additional $6.2 million per annum, and that is not currently funded. These impacts are reflected in the performance of the infrastructure backlog ratio, which for the general fund doubles in the 10-year time frame based on the current projections, and it exceeds the benchmark of less than 2%. Council's asset maintenance ratio is also below the benchmark of 100%. So this graph shows a projected performance of this ratio over the next 10 years for each fund. The key one in this graph is the purple bar, which is general fund, and it's important because we have a large amount of assets within this area. And as you can see, the ratio for general fund is well below the benchmark of 100% or higher. It's forecast to average 58% over the next 10 years. Our ratios are unable to be improved without additional funding or significant reprioritisation of existing funding. There's a large asset base valued at over $1 billion in infrastructure, and the projection for key ratios for infrastructure are currently at unacceptable levels. Short-term funding strategies are limited by the poor cash position, and the ability to take out borrowings is also limited. The council faces several years of strict financial controls that need to be in place and the need to make some hard decisions on how funding is currently being prioritised in order to improve this position. This is why council has framed the draft 21-22 budget around a back-to-basics approach with an improvement in projected operating results across all funds and increased funding prioritised towards asset renewal. We have not been able to incorporate some of the longer-term financial improvement strategies that will be required yet. However, the draft 21-22 budget does establish a starting point from which we can make further improvements. I just want to thank everyone for their patience so far. We are getting towards the end. The draft revenue policy contains information on rates, annual charges and water consumption charges. So it's a separate document to the operational plan and budget if you're seeking this on our website. And we have also included this year the proposed rates harmonisation path. It's in this document. There is an additional document that is adopted as part of the budget process, which is the proposed fees and charges. And this document contains information on all other fees and charges, so things like facility hire charges, pool entry fees, those sorts of things. So a bit of background on rates harmonisation. So up until this point, merged councils were required to preserve pre-merger rating structures. It was also called the rates freeze in the industry. It's now at an end, and from the 1st of July, the New South Wales Government requires all merged councils to harmonise rating structures. Rates harmonisation is a process where council moves to a single rating system that uses the same method to calculate rates. Different rating categories and subcategories will still be in place, but we have to ensure that the new rating system that's proposed complies with the Local Government Act. To reduce the impact of the change on individual ratepayers, the New South Wales Government has introduced legislation to allow councils to do this over a longer time frame. It came through in May, and this council has elected to harmonise rates over 4 years. Harmonisation won't result in an increase in total rates collected by council. It's a redistribution process. And rates harmonisation does not affect annual charges. We are conducting community consultation on the proposed rates harmonisation framework outlined in the revenue policy, and that is being conducted in conjunction with this consultation process. So this slide shows what the rating structure currently looks like. So on the left-hand side, that is what currently exists and what it will look like after the 4-year harmonisation process. So we are looking to streamline and amalgamate some of those categories. That also ensures that the proposed categorisation of rates is in compliance with the Local Government Act. There will be impacts on individual ratepayers where there's proposed changes to the structure. So this slide shows the average predicted impact of rates harmonisation on the former Guyra Shire Council ratepayers over 4 years. So the figures do include the rate peg, which for 21-22 is 2%, and we have assumed 2.5% for future years, but obviously at this stage that is unknown. IPART's recommendation is to continue to use 2.5% for forecasting. We have shown the average rates paid for each category within these slides as well, so the current level of average rates per category. And we haven't shown any information relating to other charges that may be paid, so wastewater and sewage. This is just ordinary rates. As you can see from this slide, the main impacted ratepayers from a percentage and dollar perspective are farmland ratepayers. And the reason for this is because farmland will be merged into one category over 4 years, and there are currently 2 separate categories for Armidale and Guyra. It will cause a rates redistribution shift, and the reason for that, the Guyra land value for farmland is about $1 billion. It's close to that in Armidale as well, so they're quite similar, but the Armidale farmland rate base is raising about $2.9 million per year, and the Guyra farmland rate base raises about $1.9 million a year. So when you bring that together, it means that there will be a shift in revenue from the current Armidale category to the Guyra category. There are some smaller impacts to some of the other categories as well. This slide shows the average predicted impact of rates harmonisation on former Armidale Demerit Council ratepayers over 4 years. So the main impacts here are to the categories where we're no longer retaining 2 or more categories, and they'll be amalgamated into one category. It's applicable to farmland, but it does also affect some of the village categories and the rural residential, which we refer to as non-urban. As rating levels were higher in the former Armidale area than the former Guyra area, it's created a shift in rates from Armidale to Guyra in those areas where those categories will be amalgamated, and it's why you are seeing some of those negative percentages on the screen. We've created a document called Rates Harmonisation, What Would I Pay?, which helps provide an indication of what rates would be paid over a 4-year implementation timeframe based on different land values. Obviously beyond 21-22, it's an estimate, and we obviously in the future will have things like land valuation processes that may impact that further. For annual charges, I've got on the slide there just the main charges that are levied. There are a few others, but all of the proposed charges are in the revenue policy. As you can see from this slide, we're proposing to increase the water access charge by $50 to $300 and increase the sewer access charge to $500. The domestic waste collection charge is proposed to increase to $425. The rural waste management charges will be increased in line with the path that was previously determined by council. So there will still be 2 different fees between the former Armidale and Guyra areas for that charge. The Waterfall Way landfill levy remains at $150, and the Waterfall Way operation charge will increase to $70. Drainage charges are set by legislation, and they will remain at the same level for that reason. And other than the rural waste management charge, all of the annual charges now consistently apply to all ratepayers across the region. For water consumption charges, we're proposing to keep the residential and commercial water consumption charges at the same level in 21-22 as they are in 2021. We're currently unable to reduce the level of consumption charges without negatively impacting water revenues and the water reserve. And given the projections for the large amounts of expenditure required to renew assets in this area, It's critical that Council generates a sufficient level of funding to operate the service and maintain the reserve. So the documents that were adopted are just shown on the slide there as part of the draft operational plan and budget process. They were adopted on the 26th of May. They're on public exhibition until the 24th of June. We're encouraging the community to provide submissions on these documents up until the 24th of June, and then we'll report those submissions back to Council along with the recommended final budget position at the meeting in June. That's scheduled for 29th of June. We have got some information in terms of fact sheets available that you can take with you tonight if you'd like hard copies. You can find some further information as well on the website under the Your Say portal. Just go to the website and search for Your Say, it will come up. And these meetings are also being live streamed so that people can attend online, and they'll remain available via the YouTube channel, so you can go and watch them later as well. So making a submission, submissions should be in writing, and they can be posted, emailed or handed in, and obviously just reiterating that the close-off date for that is the 24th of June. So thank you very much for your patience, everyone. Obviously, we now open the floor over to you guys, and happy to take any questions or hear any comments.
Any questions from anyone?
Is that working? Can you hear? Kerry Kistamoga, I live in Guyra. A couple of questions. Number one, I'd like to know the councillor who wanted to pull out the trees in Guyra, in the main street, and replace them with trees that do not grow up here. That's people power. People power got you to stop pulling the trees out and putting the ones that don't grow up here in. So is there a councillor who decided to pull them out? There must be one somewhere, surely.
No
Huh?
council made a decision like that.
Well, who made the decision?
I think it was to do with the fact that the roots weren't contained, so they were going to wreck the new road.
Well, new road, what the one they've just put in, that's another question I want to ask. But they've been in for 14 years, why haven't they done it now?
I know, it should have been done with them planted.
Yeah, well, they didn't.
I know.
But they've been in 14 years, and then they wanted to pull them out and put in trees that would not grow up here. Now, anyone on the council? What about you, Mike? You know something about that, wouldn't you?
I'll have a go. If you want to, if we're going to be factual,
Yeah.
the trees may have been in 14 years, but this has been a merged council for 5 years.
Yeah.
So fact number one. Fact number two is that it was proposed that those trees be removed because there was thought that they were creating potential safety issues or damaging infrastructure and that sort of stuff. So it was a proposal. The community were engaged. There was overwhelming support to retain those trees,
yeah.
as you've quite rightly said. And from the council's perspective, it's more than happy to support what Guyra wants, as long as there's no safety issues or damages to footpath or infrastructure. So if that can be, and we certainly won't back away from having to take a tree out if it's damaging infrastructure or creating safety issues, as I've said a couple of times now. But otherwise, more than happy to stick with that species of tree and continue that species of planting if need be, or if the community have something they'd prefer to see, happy to entertain that as a thought too. I know that there's been some angst around the merge, and I've only been with council 5 months, and that's 5 years old. And from our perspective, sitting in Armidale, if that's the way it's perceived, we don't want to come into Guyra and have people think that we're trying to take over or tell Guyra what's good for Guyra. I don't know what the process has been prior to this, but from my perspective, very happy to work with the community and make sure that we get an outcome that you're all comfortable with and satisfied with, and again, addressing safety and those other sorts of issues.
Okay, now the number two. You've given us the price of the bridges. Obviously, how much did the roadworks cost in Bradley Street? When you've got awful footpaths, you've got the entrance to the Guyra sale yards, which is bloody dreadful. You've got gravel all up around the sale yards, which every other sale yard you go to is bitumen. dust for the agents, for the buyers and everyone else?
Is that an issue that's only materialised in the
Yeah,
last
there's
4 or
quite
5
a few
years?
people have mentioned it. You just have a look at the entrance.
Just recently though, in the last few years, or
Oh.
has it been a historical issue?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I've been up there for years.
Okay,
But
so
what
it's
I'm
historical
getting
then,
at,
we can
no,
safely
but what
say.
I'm getting at is this. Footpaths are dreadful. The entrance to the sale yards and everything else is dreadful, and the gravels. Can you tell us how much the Bradley Street road cost and how much it cost to pull those fuel tanks out?
I can't give you the figure off the top of my head unless someone else has got it,
Well,
but
someone else.
I
you
can
probably
get it.
can.
Yeah,
Yeah, everyone wants to know.
no, we can certainly get it for you, but
Yep.
I can't give it to you right here.
Okay, I think the majority of Guyra would like to know. And also, why did you do it?
Why did we?
Why did you pull up the main street of Guyra? What was the reason?
Yeah, I can probably answer that.
Hmm?
Not as a road construction expert.
No.
I guess where that project came from, that was one of the key projects proposed under the council received merger funding, as all merged councils did. So under the capital component of that program, the Guyra Main Street upgrade was proposed along with a number of other capital projects. So that project was proposed and consulted on really at the point of merger with the group of people that would have been I guess, allocating those funds, which was a committee, I believe, with the state member on it and some council representatives. And we are continuing to finalise that project. Obviously, with drought and finding fuel tanks and a whole heap of other things, there's been some significant delays in getting the work done. However, the continuation of the work that you see now is actually still finalising that originally proposed merger funds project.
But that Bradley Street was the main highway for years and years. Heavy trucks going backwards and forwards for years. The heaviest thing that would go down there now would be probably a Land Cruiser pulling a horse float. All it needed doing was top dressing with 6 inches of bloody bitumen, and you would have solved everything without spending all that money. Come on.
Just on the sale yards, council was successful with the bushfire local economic recovery grant of $5 million, and that's across Armidale and Guyra. So we've got approximately half spent in Guyra. We're very close to engaging the contractor to do that, including the design. Most of that will be around replacing the timber yards into steel yards, the amenities block, the office block. Also do some pollution controls. At the moment, for the last 30, 40, 50, 60 years, that waste has just run off down the corner, down into the Malpas catchment. So we've got a pretty serious problem there with the runoff and doing the right thing by the pollution. If we have enough funds, we will look at, as you say, the track around. I can't stand here right now and say we will go that far. $2.5 million sounds a lot for Guyra, but it doesn't go as far as, as what we like, but we'll keep doing what we can. And I will say this is largely driven by consultation with the Stock Agents Association. It's not my idea, it's not particularly council's idea, heavily driven by ongoing consultations with the sale yard operators. So, yeah.
The other point too about the main street, I've been coming up here, as Derek knows, I've been coming up here, since we came back, I've been coming up here every month at least and talking to people, and we had a council meeting here the month before last where we had a presentation on the main street and what was being done, and Chris Heatbrink came to me and said, we're not happy. I spoke to James, and to his credit, he organised for the engineer concerned to do a presentation to the Chamber of Commerce and the Guyra Garden Club, and as a result of that, we approached James, and James indicated the trees would not be pulled out apart from the safety issue. So We did listen to the community. Those sort of decisions are not made by councillors. I'm lucky to be allowed to have a shovel in my hand at home. It's up to the staff to make those sorts of decisions and recommendations. They're operational. We don't get involved in those, but when we get problems from the staff, from the ratepayers telling us a problem, we then go to James and try and get it fixed. So that's how we've fixed it, work with the main street. The other problem with the main street is the power is running through a lot of the awnings, and we've been working with Essential Energy because that's a safety issue, trying to find a way around that. So we are trying to do some things, and I'm aware about the crepe myrtle issue, and we're making arrangements to try and find a better species.
There's one part of the section of the road up past hospital. They dug that out twice. Why? I mean, when you do a job, you say, right, it's going to cost us X amount of money if you get a contractor and then you do it. They pulled that bloody thing up twice, and it was from here to the ceiling high. Now, why did they pull it out? Why did they do it properly in the first place?
I could probably answer that. I think there was a little bit of, for want of a better word, poor scoping of that project in terms from a pavement design perspective. So a lot of that material there is very poor material, that black soil. So they went down to the design subgrade level and tried to proof roll it, and they thought they'd have a decent foundation to work from, but it failed under a water cart. So from there, they need to go down further. So
Why didn't it go down 20 years ago when the big trucks were going back and forth?
I can't answer that. I don't know. Sheer luck.
Because it wasn't necessary.
Yeah, I'd say by sheer luck that it didn't fail.
About 50 years ago.
Yeah, I'm happy to have a discussion offline about this with the project engineers that are actually involved in that project, because I'm not 100% across it, but more than happy to have that discussion with them, with the facts behind us.
But we are listening to the Guyra community. I mean, the preschool, we're still trying to get that to happen. We've done Main Street. We're also working on a whole variety of other projects. That's why I'm up here regularly to listen and feedback.
Well, we appreciate you coming up here, Peter.
Yeah.
It's a pity a few of the others don't come up to let us know what's going on.
I enjoy having coffee with your wife, that's why.
Yeah, I'll tell her that. You make. He's got
See if we give someone else a bit of a go.
I'd just like to address your question about the footpath. So with the footpath, that works is going to hold off for a time, because we're going to try and program that. We need to replace the water main under the footpath and all the services. So we don't want to do the footpath work before we do that water main work. So as we replace the water main and the services, the footpath will be done behind that. So that is a stage that's coming.
And I might just, and sir, I'm sorry, sir, I didn't quite catch your name earlier, but I just want to make the point too that you touched on a couple of the questions that you raised, talked about some sort of historical stuff, and there are a lot of legacy issues that the new merged organisation is inherited, but at both ends of the council area, and we're doing what we can to work through those. And for instance, there's probably about $50 odd million worth of infrastructure upgrades or renewals that have got to be done across the Guyra area, or the former Guyra council area, and we're talking probably the best part of 25 to 30 million of that is in water and sewer plant upgrades, the new preschool for Guyra, the remediation of the tip site out here was about $4 or $5 million project. So there's a significant amount of legacy, what we would call legacy projects, or projects that predate this particular entity that we're trying to get to, and that's right across the council area too. So there's a significant amount of catch-up. Ben touched on the issue before around project management and how we do that, and scoping and design. That's not been a strong suit of probably either council back in the day, and certainly not a strong suit of this council, and that's that's one of the key focuses for us in terms of moving forward, to make sure we design and scope projects out in a really responsible way. We can cost them at the same time. So when we put in for grant funding, we know that the $1 million we get is the $1 million that we'll spend or need to spend. As opposed to thinking it's going to be $1 million and ends up being $3 million because we don't scope it properly and we run into all the problems that you've just talked about in the main street. So it's a bit of a work in progress for us. We're aware that it's a weakness that we've got, and we're working hard to address that.
Can I just ask if there's any idea of when the footpath in Bradley Street will be able to be done? What the time frame is for the services underneath and renewing it?
At this stage, we're looking at second half of next financial year. That depends. The water budget's there to do the water, but we've got to wait until there's budget for the footpath. So, because like I said, we don't want to do one without the other. So.
Just a question regarding the sale yards. From a biosecurity perspective, the washdown points are probably inadequate. I'm sure you'll get this consultation with the sale yard agent stuff, but it needs a little bit better accessibility from truck drivers that don't necessarily have an account with council and stuff. There's a way they can pay when they come through, because we don't want to spread any further disease from a veterinary perspective. Is that?
Are you talking about the truck stop behind the service station?
I wouldn't call it, that's the existing one, but that needs to be improved if we're talking about sale yard.
That's not in our control. It was the council asset, previous council asset. It's not our asset anymore.
So currently, if you are a truck driver coming through, you have nowhere to wash down if you are attending the sale yards.
Well, you can go there.
You can go to the airport truck stop. The Ampol, you can go to the Ampol.
Yeah.
Caltex, sorry, and use theirs. You just use their account. Yeah, so that's their asset. It's not council.
So no, but if we were doing a sale yard upgrade, I would think it would be relevant to have it as part of the sale yard facilities.
Look, all I can say is the operators didn't identify that, and as one of their higher priorities, they've identified some of those other things, particularly wood to steel, and around animal welfare. I think moving the cattle yards, as I say, the amenities blocks, the toilets block, the office block, and what has really become an issue is this pollution that's running off under Falconer Road and going into Malpas catchment. So we've got obligations under Malpas to do the best possible job and reduce those risks and spread of contaminants going into the Malpas catchment for all our benefit. And so they've prioritised that. If they...
The washdown point, it would need to use that same catchment facility, so it would be worthy to, if you're not considering putting a washdown point, having something in the future that would be able to be contained on the same catchment.
That's right. We agree. We can't have particularly any animal contamination coming down into our water drinking catchment. And if you do go into our draft budget there, I'd just urge you to have a look at some of the things we are doing around Malpas, and that includes a 10-year catchment strategy plan. We're investing, I think it's $100,000 to address some of these things. But in that sale yard particularly project, it's not there at the moment. If you have a view on that, I would strongly urge you to talk to your elders or your Nutrien and the Agents Association, and they can have that, because we've got to talk to a united voice, if you like, and try and prioritise. Look, the only thing I can say with any certainty is that we won't be able to do everything. We're very pleased and proud that we can get on and do this $2.5 million worth of important works, and that may set us up for a bit more down the future.
And maybe perhaps if you, as Scott was suggesting, perhaps if you feed it in through the agent side of it, we can drive it from our end and then might meet in the middle and get a bit of traction.
It doesn't have to be constructed,
Yeah.
construction.
All right.
But if you have, like with your water, everything sort of set up so it can go forward easily
Yep.
without having to rebuild each bit. That's
Yeah, we get it into some forward plans, we should be, at least it can be thought about. Yeah, sure.
Was there any contaminated soil in the Bradley Street?
I can't answer that, I'm sorry.
Does anyone know that?
No, not off the top of our heads, but I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to get you a nice little brief on this. We'll give you the history of it, what's come out of it, why the tanks, the up and down. This is my technical engineering skills coming to the fore here. The up and down stuff, and we'll get that for you, give you a little bit of a paper on it, and provide that to the community back through the chamber.
Because I think everyone would be very interested.
Yeah, sure.
Anyway, now you have another talk. Come on.
Looking for other people, here we go. Might be good to say your name if...
Keith Fleming. I'm actually from Armidale. Kelly, early in your presentation, you referred to cost transfers from state to councils. Now, this seems to have been going on for many years. No funding, no reimbursements. You seem to brush over it saying a council has to meet these costs. Why? They're state government costs. Why should this council and other councils have to meet state government costs?
I would say, Keith, that is an excellent question, and the answer is that we shouldn't. But what we do, and this is often where local councils get themselves into trouble, they try so hard to be all things to all people and deliver, rather than see their community suffer, because something may, perhaps arguably could be being delivered from another part of the machineries of government. It doesn't happen, so local councils often try and bite off way more than they can chew, and then chew like crazy. So we certainly are onto that, and we recognise it when we see it happening. We certainly make representations in that regard, and perhaps being from Armidale, this will probably resonate well with you, but the hydrotherapy pool is probably a really good example of that. Once the state provided facility out of the hospital that was, and now it's looking very much like it's going to be the responsibility of the council to provide that if we want to have a hydrotherapy pool for the region. So, and it's not, typically that's not something that a local authority would do. It is really something that a state government entity would provide. So, but we are conscious of it. We've got, there was a notice of motion or a motion passed at council a couple of months ago to start to build up a bit of a case where that's happening, and submit a business case off to the government to look to remedy or rectify some of those issues that Armidale Regional Council have identified. So we are certainly aware of it and onto it. But you're quite right, it shouldn't be happening, we shouldn't be doing it, but the community misses out if we don't take some of that stuff on.
Keith, suffice to say that the 7 councils that are left, we are lobbying both Adam and Barnaby about cost transfer, and they are hearing our message. Whether ever anything happens, it's been going on under Liberal, Labor, National Party, Calathumpian governments. They've all been doing it, and it's something that we need to get raised again at state and federal elections. And the hydrotherapy pool is the classic example. It was covered by Hunter New England Health. They cover the running cost. They provide a perfectly good hydrotherapy pool in Tamworth, and they cover all the running costs for that, but they wouldn't do anything for up here. So it's discrimination.
The hydrotherapy pool was the second issue that I have. I didn't hear anything mentioned about that. And I thought it was in the council's hands to actually make the next move. But it appears it's not on the books. Something that is needed, as Peter well knows, I'm actually a swimming coach and been involved in hydrotherapy use over many years. And it's something that I've also referred to Adam, and last correspondence I had with him, he said he was going to speak with Armidale City Council, and I was hoping that that had occurred. I'd be very interested in any comments people have on that.
Strangely enough, I was only reading a letter from Adam today, sent to us on behalf of yourself. I thought I recognised the name. So yeah, we've responded to Adam, or I've responded to Adam today. But to go to your question about why it's not in the budget, what the back to basics nature of this budget that we're putting forward or proposing to council and the community for 21-22 and probably the next financial year as well, by its very nature is back to basics. And what we're doing is we're only including projects in there that we know that are actually funded. Now that's not to say that we're not advocating behind the scenes for things like the hydrotherapy pool and other really important issues on behalf of the council, but in terms of what we're committing in this budget to complete as a project is projects that we know that we've got grant funding or money to actually undertake that work. But as I say, rest assured that there is lots of work happening in the background around the hydrotherapy pool, and I can't say too much, but there's a couple of irons in the fire that may very well see it come to pass. But it's a long way to go at this point, and we're short of money as well for it.
Could I just add in there, Keith, we had the capital costs, but Hunter New England Health refused to give us any contribution to the running cost. And under the period when we were in administration and had an acting general manager, they made the decision to not go ahead with the project on the basis that the losses associated with running a hydrotherapy pool were too great. And that was the decision. That's what I'm fighting. Well, Hunter New England Health is state government, yes. Right to Michael De Lorenzo.
Any other questions from anyone? If not, I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank you all very much for being here this evening. As Kelly mentioned earlier, submissions, we're accepting them through to the 24th of June. Happy for you to get them in any way you can to us, and they'll be considered by council as as a lead up to the adoption of the budget, on which we'll have an extraordinary meeting on the 29th of June to seek to formally adopt the budget. But if there's no further questions, thank you all very much. Really appreciate your time.